The fortress of Drakmor stood like a jagged tooth against the crimson sky. Its black towers stretched upward, piercing the clouds that forever circled the mountain peak. Inside those walls lived King Thraxian, the last of the great dragon lords. His scales were the color of midnight, shot through with veins of gold that glowed when his anger rose. And his anger rose often. The throne room echoed with a sound that made every creature in the castle freeze. It was not quite a roar, not quite a growl, but something worse. It was the sound of disappointment given voice through a throat that could breathe fire hot enough to melt stone. Failed, Thraxian said, the word rolling out like thunder. His massive head lowered until his eye, large as a wagon wheel, fixed upon the trembling figure before him. You failed me, General Croth. The reptilian warrior, himself standing twice the height of a human, seemed to shrink. His scales, usually a proud emerald green, had gone pale. My lord, the Eastern Territories resisted more than we expected. They had weapons we did not anticipate. Excuses. The Dragon King's tail swept across the stone floor, the sound like a blade being drawn. I do not accept excuses. I accept results. You promised me those territories within a moon cycle. 2 moon cycles have passed. Kroth's hand shook. Every being in the Empire knew what came next. Punishment. Swift, harsh, and without mercy. The Dragon King tolerated no failure, no weakness, no deviation from perfection. His empire had been built on this principle. Succeed or suffer. Please, my king, Kroth began, but the words died in his throat as smoke began to curl from Thraxian's nostrils. You are stripped of your rank, the Dragon King declared. You will serve in the lowest pits, shoveling waste for the next 10 years. Perhaps there you will learn the value of keeping one's word. Guards moved forward, seizing Kroth by his arms. The former general did not resist. He knew better. Everyone knew better. As they dragged him away, Thraxian turned his gaze to the assembled court. Dragons, reptilians, birdfolk, and even a few of the conquered species stood in rigid attention. Let this be a lesson, Thraxian said, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast hall. In my empire, failure is not an option. It is a choice, and choices have consequences. The court murmured their agreement, though none too loudly. To show too much emotion in either direction was dangerous. The Dragon King demanded perfect control, perfect obedience, perfect execution of his will. As the assembly dispersed, Thraxian climbed the steps to his throne. It was carved from a single piece of obsidian, shaped to accommodate his massive form. He settled into it with a heavy sigh that sent a wave of heat through the room. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Not quite regret, but something close. Then, it was gone, replaced by the usual mask of stern authority. In the lower levels of the fortress, far from the grand halls and chambers of state, the stables existed in a different world. Here, the air smelled of hay and animal musk. The sounds were softer, the shuffle of hooves, the rustle of wings, the occasional snort or chirp from the various mounts kept by the Empire's warriors and officials. Among the stalls, a figure moved with quiet efficiency. He was human, which made him unusual in Drakmor. Humans were a conquered species, taken into the Empire 3 generations ago, when Thraxian's grandfather had swept through their lands. Most humans served as laborers, farmers, or servants. Very few were allowed within the fortress itself. His name was Finn, and he had worked in the royal stables for 5 years. He was 23 years old, of average height, with brown hair that always seemed to be dusted with hay no matter how often he brushed it. His hands were calloused from work, his clothes simple and worn. Nothing about him suggested importance or destiny. Yet Finn had a gift. He understood animals in a way that others did not. Not through magic or special powers, but through patience and genuine care. The wardrakes, fierce creatures that most handlers approached with poles and chains, would eat from his hand. The sky steeds, temperamental flying mounts that threw most riders, allowed him to walk among them freely. Easy now, Finn murmured, approaching a particularly agitated wardrake. The creature had been brought in that morning, its scales scarred from recent battle. It had already bitten 3 handlers and was scheduled to be put down as too dangerous. Nobody's going to hurt you here. The drake's yellow eyes fixed on him, pupils narrowing to slits. Its lips curled back, revealing teeth like daggers. But Finn did not flinch. He did not raise his voice or grab for restraints. He simply stood there, hand extended, letting the creature see he meant no harm. "That's it," Finn said softly. "You've had a rough time, haven't you? All that fighting, all that pain. But you're safe now. I promise." Minutes passed. The other stable workers watched from a safe distance, certain they were about to witness a horrible accident. But slowly, impossibly, the drake's posture changed. Its spines lowered, its breathing slowed, and then, miracle of miracles, it lowered its head and allowed Finn to touch its snout. "There we go," Finn said, relief flooding through him. "You're going to be fine." "How do you do that?" a voice asked from behind him. Finn turned to find his supervisor, a gruff birdman named Tarek, staring at him with something like wonder. Tarek had been working with animals for 40 years and had never seen anything like what Finn could do. "I don't know," Finn admitted. "I just listen to them. Really listen. They tell you what they need if you pay attention." Tarek shook his feathered head. "You've got a rare gift, boy, wasted down here in these stables." He lowered his voice. "You know, the king's personal mount has been ill. None of the handlers can get close enough to treat him properly. Maybe you should—" "No," Finn said quickly. "Absolutely not. I stay down here with the regular animals. I don't go near anything that belongs to the king." "Why not?" "You could help. Because when you work for the king, he notices you. And when he notices you, he has expectations. And when you fail to meet those expectations—" Finn didn't need to finish. Everyone knew what happened to those who disappointed Thraxian. Tarek nodded slowly. "Smart thinking. Keep your head down. Do your work. Stay invisible." "Exactly," Finn agreed. But fate, as it often does, had different plans. 2 days later, Finn was mucking out stalls when a commotion erupted near the stable entrance. Guards in black armor came marching in, their footsteps perfectly synchronized. Behind them walked a figure Finn recognized, Lord Vexus, the master of the royal household. Vexus was a snake folk, tall and thin with scales that gleamed like polished copper. His eyes missed nothing, and his tongue flicked out constantly, tasting the air. When he spoke, his words carried the subtle hiss of his species. "You," he said, pointing directly at Finn. "You're the one called Finn." Finn's heart sank. "Yes, my lord. Come with us." Immediately, there was no refusing a direct order from someone of Vexus's rank. Finn set down his pitchfork and followed, his mind racing. What had he done wrong? Had someone complained about his work? Was he being reassigned? Or worse, was he being punished for something he didn't even know he'd done? They led him through corridors he'd never walked before. The stable workers lived and worked in the lower levels, never venturing into the fortress proper. But now Finn found himself climbing stairs, passing through halls decorated with tapestries and trophies from 100 conquered worlds. Guards stood at every corner, their weapons gleaming. Finally, they reached a chamber that made Finn stop in his tracks. It was enormous, with a ceiling that soared 50 feet overhead. And in the center, on a bed of golden straw, lay a dragon. Not the king himself, but close. This dragon was smaller, perhaps only 30 feet long from snout to tail. His scales were deep crimson with hints of orange, like a sunset made solid. He wore a collar of gold, marking him as royal property. But what struck Finn most was how the dragon looked sick. His breathing was labored, rattling in his chest. His eyes were clouded, and his scales had lost their luster. Dried blood crusted around his nostrils, and his body trembled with each breath. "This is Pyroth," Vexus said, "the king's personal mount and companion for 30 years. He took ill 3 weeks ago. Our best healers have tried everything. Nothing works. He grows worse each day." Finn swallowed hard. "Why am I here?" "Because you have a reputation among the stable workers. They say you can calm any beast, heal any ailment. The king has been informed of your abilities. He commands that you cure Pyroth." The words landed like a physical blow. Commands. The king commands, which meant there was no choice, no escape. My lord, Finn said carefully, I'm just a stable boy. I work with war drakes and sky steeds. I've never treated a dragon before. Surely your healers have failed, Vexis interrupted. You are our last option. The king is attached to Pyroth. If the dragon dies, his displeasure will be considerable. Many will suffer. The unspoken message was clear. If Finn failed, the consequences would fall not just on him, but on everyone connected to the situation. The healers, the stable workers, maybe even the other humans in the fortress. Thraxian's anger was like wildfire. It consumed everything in its path. Finn looked at the suffering dragon. Despite his fear, he felt a pang of sympathy. This creature was in pain, confused, and frightened. It didn't matter that he was royal property or that failure meant disaster. What mattered was that something needed help. I'll need supplies, Finn said quietly. And I'll need everyone to leave. Animals don't trust crowds, especially when they're sick. Vexis hesitated. The king's orders were to observe. Then, I can't help, Finn said, surprising himself with his own firmness. I need silence and space. That's not negotiable. For a long moment, Vexis stared at him. Then, slowly he nodded. Very well. But guard will remain outside. You have until nightfall to show improvement. After that, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The chamber emptied. Finn found himself alone with Pyroth, acutely aware that his life now hung by a thread. He took a deep breath and approached the dragon slowly, hands visible, posture relaxed despite the fear coursing through him. Hello there, he said softly. My name is Finn. I'm going to try to help you if you'll let me. Pyroth's clouded eyes tracked him. A low growl rumbled in the dragon's chest, but it was weak, without real threat behind it. Finn kept moving, closing the distance between them. I know you don't know me, Finn continued, his voice steady and calm. I know you probably don't trust me, but I need you to understand something. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here because you're sick, and I might be able to make you feel better. He was close enough now to touch. Finn extended his hand slowly, letting it hover near Pyroth's snout. The dragon's breath was hot and smelled of sulfur and sickness. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Then, weakly, Pyroth's head moved forward, pressing against Finn's palm. That's it, Finn whispered. Good. Now let me take a look at you. He spent the next hour examining the dragon thoroughly. He checked Pyroth's eyes, his mouth, his scales. He listened to his breathing, felt along his body for signs of injury or illness. And, slowly, a picture began to form. The healers had been treating this as a disease. They'd given potions and herbs, performed rituals, and cast spells. But Finn recognized something different. He'd seen it before in war drakes that had been worked too hard for too long. Exhaustion. Deep, bone-weary exhaustion coupled with emotional distress. Dragons bonded with their riders. Finn knew this from his studies of the creatures. They weren't just mounts. They were partners, friends. And Thraxian had been different lately, hadn't he? More harsh, more distant, more consumed by his role as king. When had he last spent real time with Pyroth? When had he last shown affection rather than just expectation? The dragon wasn't dying from disease. He was dying from heartbreak. Finn sat back, mind racing. How did you explain that to a king? How did you tell the most powerful being in the empire that his own behavior was killing his closest companion? You didn't. Not if you wanted to keep breathing. But if Finn said nothing, Pyroth would die. And many would suffer for that failure. The hours passed. Finn worked steadily, doing what he could with physical remedies. He cleaned Pyroth's wounds, gave him fresh water mixed with healing herbs, and simply stayed present. He talked to the dragon, his voice a constant, soothing presence. He told stories about the other animals in the stables, about his own life, about nothing and everything. And gradually, subtly, Pyroth began to respond. His breathing eased slightly. The trembling in his limbs decreased. When Finn offered him food, the dragon actually ate a small amount. When nightfall came, Vexis returned with a contingent of guards. His expression was neutral, but Finn could see the tension in the way he held himself. Behind him, moving with a presence that seemed to darken the very air, came King Thraxian himself. The Dragon King had a duck to enter even this massive chamber. His scales caught the torchlight, making him seem to glow with inner fire. His eyes, ancient and terrible, swept the room before settling on Pyroth. For just a moment, something flickered in those depths. Concern? Fear? It was gone too quickly for Finn to be sure. "Report," Thraxian commanded, his voice shaking dust from the rafters. Finn bowed low, trying to control his shaking. He had never been this close to the king before. The sheer power radiating from Thraxian was overwhelming. "My lord, Pyroth's condition has stabilized. His breathing is easier, and he has taken food and water. But he is not cured," Thraxian stated. It was not a question. "No, my lord." Silence fell, heavy as a stone. Finn kept his eyes down, waiting for the explosion of rage that would surely come. Instead, he heard something unexpected, the sound of the Dragon King moving closer to Pyroth, his massive claws clicking on the stone floor. "Old friend," Thraxian said, and his voice was different now. Softer, touched with something that might have been grief. "What ails you?" Pyroth lifted his head weakly. A small sound emerged from his throat, almost like a whimper. Thraxian's head lowered, pressing against his companion's neck in a gesture of surprising tenderness. For a long moment, King and Mount remained that way, and everyone else in the room seemed to fade into insignificance. Then Thraxian straightened, and the mask of authority slipped back into place. "You," he said, focusing on Finn. "Tell me truly, can you save him?" This was the moment. Finn could lie, buy himself more time, postpone the inevitable. Or he could speak the truth and face whatever consequences came. "I can help his body heal," Finn said quietly. "But, my lord, the sickness isn't just physical. Pyroth is." He hesitated, then forced himself to continue. "He's lonely. He misses you." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Vexus made a strangled sound. The guards' hands moved toward their weapons. No one spoke to the king this way. No one dared suggest that the great Thraxian could be at fault for anything. But Thraxian did not explode into rage. Instead, he stared at Finn with an intensity that made the young man wish he could sink into the floor and disappear. "Explain," the king said, the single word sharp as a blade. Finn's mouth had gone dry, but he pushed forward. "Dragons bond with their riders, my lord. It's not just partnership, it's deeper than that. They feel what you feel. When you're distant, when you're consumed by other things, they suffer. Pyroth has been by your side for 30 years. He's watched you become harder, more severe. He feels your anger at every failure, your disappointment in everyone around you. And he thinks," Finn's voice faltered, but he made himself finish. "He thinks he's failed you too, that he's not good enough anymore. So he's giving up." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the torches seemed to stop flickering. Finn waited for death, certain it would come. He had overstepped so far beyond what was acceptable that there could be no other outcome. "Everyone leave," Thraxian said quietly. "Except you, human." The room emptied in seconds. Vexus shot Finn a look that might have been sympathy or farewell before disappearing through the doorway. The heavy doors closed with a boom that echoed like a funeral drum. Finn was alone with the Dragon King and his dying mount. Thraxian moved to Pyroth's side and settled down beside him, his massive form curling around the smaller dragon. For a long time, he said nothing. Finn remained frozen in place, barely daring to breathe. "When I was young," Thraxian finally said, "I was weak, small for my kind. My brothers mocked me. My father despaired of me ever becoming a worthy heir. They call me soft because I cared about things they deemed beneath us. Beauty, music, the happiness of those who served us." He paused, one claw gently stroking Pyroth's scales. "My father told me that weakness was the greatest sin, that to show mercy was to invite destruction, that a king must be harder than stone and colder than ice." Finn listened, astonished. He had never heard the king speak like this, had never imagined him capable of such reflection. So, I made myself hard, Thraxian continued. I buried everything soft, everything kind. I became the king my father wanted me to be. Strong, merciless, demanding perfection from everyone, including myself. His eyes, ancient and tired, met Finn's. And it worked. I built an empire that spans worlds. No one dares challenge my authority. I have achieved everything my father dreamed of. But, Finn ventured softly. But I lost myself in the process. And, worse, I hurt the one being who has been loyal to me through everything. Thraxian's head lowered to rest against Pyrothus. I forgot that strength can also mean compassion. That power includes the ability to forgive. That perfection is impossible, and demanding it only creates fear. Pyroth made a soft sound, and Thraxian responded with a rumble that might have been a purr. The two dragons stayed that way, and Finn saw something he never expected to witness, the great dragon king weeping. Not with tears, for dragons didn't cry that way, but with small tremors that ran through his massive frame. I'm sorry, old friend, Thraxian whispered. I'm so sorry. Finn felt his own eyes sting. There was something profound happening here, something that transcended species and rank. It was simply two beings who loved each other reconnecting after a long separation. My lord, Finn said gently. If I may suggest something? Thraxian looked up. Speak. Stay with him tonight. Talk to him. Remember the good times you've shared. Let him know he's valued, not for what he does, but for who he is. Physical medicine can only do so much. He needs his friend back. The Dragon King regarded him for a long moment. Then, slowly he nodded. You are wiser than many who have lived 10 times your years, human. What is your name? Finn, my lord. Finn. Thraxian tasted the name, then nodded again. You will return tomorrow to continue Pyroth's treatment. But tonight you are right. He needs something only I can give him. Finn bowed and moved toward the door. Before he left, he heard Thraxian begin to speak again, his voice low and warm, telling Pyroth about the first time they flew together, about the storms they had weathered, about the victories and defeats, and simple moments of joy they had shared over 3 decades. The door closed behind Finn, and he found himself in the corridor, trembling from the weight of what had just happened. Vexus stood waiting, his expression unreadable. You took a tremendous risk, the Snake Man said. I know. You could have been executed for speaking to the king that way. I know. Vexus's tongue flicked out thoughtfully. But you did it anyway, because you believed it was right. Because Pyroth needed someone to speak for him. Finn corrected. He couldn't tell the king what was wrong. Someone had to. A strange smile crossed Vexus's face. You are either the bravest fool I've ever met, or something far more interesting. Time will tell which. He gestured down the corridor. Gulme, I'll have you return to the stables. And Finn, whatever happens next, remember this night. Remember that truth spoken with compassion can change even the hardest heart. Finn returned to the stables in a daze. The other workers clustered around him, full of questions, but he waved them off. He needed to think, to process what had happened. He'd seen a side of the Dragon King that few, if any, had witnessed. The vulnerable side, the part that still grieved and felt and cared despite decades of forcing himself into a mold of merciless authority. The next morning, Finn was summoned again. This time, when he entered Pyroth's chamber, the change was remarkable. The dragon's eyes were clearer, his breathing stronger. He lifted his head when Finn entered, and there was life in that gaze that hadn't been there before. Thraxian was still there. The king looked exhausted, as if he hadn't slept, but there was something lighter about him, something less burdened. Your treatment was effective, Thraxian said. Pyroth has improved significantly. Finn bowed. I'm glad, my lord. With continued care, he should make a full recovery. You will provide that care. I'm assigning you as Pyroth's primary handler. You will also supervise all the royal mounts. Before Finn could protest the dangerous promotion, Thraxian continued, and you will attend me daily to report on their condition. I have been neglectful of those who serve me. That ends now. My lord, I'm just a stable boy. I don't have the training. You have something more valuable than training. You have empathy. You have the ability to see what others need, even when they cannot express it themselves. Thraxian's gaze was intense. You reminded me of something I had forgotten, that caring for others is not weakness. It is the foundation of true strength. Over the following weeks, Pyroth recovered fully, but the changes in the fortress went deeper than one dragon's return to health. Word spread quickly about what had happened, though the exact details were known only to a few. But everyone noticed that the king seemed different. He still demanded excellence from his subordinates, but now he also asked about their challenges, listened to their concerns. When General Croth completed his punishment in the waste pits, Thraxian summoned him and offered him a lesser command, acknowledging that failure could be a teacher rather than just a crime. The general wept with gratitude and served thereafter with renewed dedication. The change was subtle but pervasive. The fortress, which had operated under a cloud of fear, began to breathe more easily. People still worked hard, still strove for excellence, but they no longer moved in constant terror of making a mistake. And, paradoxically, this made them more effective, not less. When you're not paralyzed by fear of failure, you could take the necessary risks that lead to innovation and success. Finn found his new position both terrifying and rewarding. He did attend the king daily, reporting on the royal mounts. But these sessions became something more. Thraxian would ask questions about the animals, yes, but also about Finn's observations of the fortress, about what he heard from the workers, about problems that might not be reaching the throne room through official channels. You move among those who serve me, but are not part of the court, Thraxian explained. You hear truths that never reach my ears because people fear my reaction. I need those truths. Help me be a better king. It was an impossible request, really. How could a human stable boy guide the most powerful being in the Empire? But Finn did his best. He spoke honestly, but carefully, always mindful of the king's dignity. 3 months after Pyroth's recovery, a crisis emerged that would test everything that had changed in Drakmor. A rebellion broke out in the Western Territories, led by a coalition of conquered species who had grown tired of imperial rule. The rebels weren't just fighting with weapons. They were winning hearts and minds, spreading messages about freedom and self-determination. Thraxian's council gathered in the war room, a circular chamber dominated by a massive table carved from stone. Maps covered every surface, marked with troop positions and supply lines. The king's advisors, representing every major species in the empire, argued hotly about the proper response. Crush them, growled General Croth, who had proven himself worthy of his restored rank. Send 3 legions. Make an example that will echo through every conquered world. Show them what happens when they defy your authority. That's exactly what they expect, countered Lady Seraph, a bird woman whose strategic mind was legendary. They want us to respond with overwhelming force. It will only prove their point that we're tyrants. We'll win the battle, but lose the larger war. Are you suggesting we negotiate with rebels? Another advisor asked incredulously. Show weakness. I'm suggesting we find out why they're rebelling, Seraph replied. People don't risk their lives fighting against overwhelming odds unless they have real grievances. The argument continued, voices rising. Finn stood in his usual place near the wall, present because Thraxian had started including him in council meetings. The other advisors had initially protested a stable boy attending matters of state, but the king had silenced them with a look. Now, they mostly ignored him, which suited Finn fine. But today, Thraxian's gaze found him across the room. Finn, you've been quiet. What do you think? The chamber fell silent. Dozens of eyes turned toward him, some curious, others hostile. Who was this human to speak on matters of war and peace? Finn's throat went dry. He was no strategist, no general. What could he possibly contribute to this discussion? But Thraxian was waiting, and Finn had learned that the king valued honesty over cleverness. My lord, Finn said carefully, may I ask a question first? Speak. What happened to Pyroth happened because you stopped listening to him. You were so focused on being strong, on demanding perfection that you forgot to check whether he was okay. He got sick because the relationship became one-sided. Finn paused, gathering his courage. Isn't an empire kind of like that? A relationship between ruler and ruled. The silence deepened. Some advisors looked scandalized. Others looked thoughtful. Continue, Thraxian said, his tone unreadable. Well, if the Western territories are rebelling, maybe it's not just because they're naturally rebellious. Maybe it's because we stopped listening to them, stopped caring about whether they were okay. We just demanded obedience and took what we wanted. Finn felt himself getting bolder despite his fear. General Croft wants to crush them, and maybe that works short-term. But if we don't fix the relationship, we'll be crushing rebellions forever. Because the problem isn't the rebellion. It's why they're rebelling. You're suggesting we should coddle them? Croft demanded. Reward their defiance? I'm suggesting we should understand them, Finn replied. When an animal acts out, it's usually because something is wrong. You don't just beat it into submission, you figure out what it needs. Why would people be different? Lady Seraph was nodding slowly. The boy makes sense. We have intelligence reports about the Western territories, but they're all about military capabilities and tactical positions. We know nothing about what the people actually want, what their daily lives are like, what specific grievances drove them to rebellion. Because we never asked, Finn added softly. We just assumed obedience was enough. Thraxian rose from his seat, his massive form dominating the room. He walked to the largest map, studying the Western territories with new eyes. The advisors waited tense. What the king decided in the next few minutes would determine the fate of millions. Seraph, Thraxian finally said, select a diplomatic envoy. They will go to the Western territories under a flag of truce. Their mission is not to demand surrender, but to listen. I want to know what has driven our subjects to rebellion. What we have done wrong. What they need from us. My lord, Croft protested, this shows weakness. It tells them they can defy you and be rewarded. It shows wisdom. Thraxian cut him off. I have ruled through fear for decades. It built an empire, yes, but at what cost? How much energy have we spent suppressing rebellions that need not have happened? How many loyal subjects might we have had if we had bothered to treat them with dignity? His eyes swept the council. I will not make the same mistake with my empire that I made with Pyroth. I will not let pride and fear of appearing weak blind me to the truth. He turned to Finn. You will accompany the envoy as an advisor. Finn's eyes widened. My lord, I'm not qualified. You're more qualified than you know. You understand something that many of my advisors, for all their education and experience, have forgotten. That beings respond to compassion. That understanding creates loyalty far more powerful than fear. Thraxian's expression softened slightly. Besides, you are human. The Western territories include several human settlements. They might speak more freely to one of their own kind. There was no arguing with a direct command from the king. 3 days later, Finn found himself aboard a skyship, heading west with Lady Seraph and a small diplomatic party. No army accompanied them, just a handful of guards for basic protection. It was, as Seraph noted wryly, either the bravest or most foolish mission she'd ever led. The Western territories were beautiful, Finn discovered. Rolling hills covered in golden grass, forests thick with ancient trees, rivers that sparkled like ribbons of silver. But the beauty was marred by signs of conflict. Burned villages, abandoned farms, refugees on the roads, carrying what little they owned. The diplomatic party traveled under a white flag, and after 2 days, they made contact with the rebel leadership. The meeting took place in a forest clearing, neutral ground where neither side held advantage. The rebel leaders were a mixed group. Humans, reptilians, birdfolk, even a few dragons who had joined the uprising. They looked tired, determined, and deeply skeptical. Lady Seraph handled the opening negotiations with grace, explaining that they had come to listen, not to threaten. But the rebels remained guarded until Finn, standing quietly to one side, was recognized by one of the human leaders. Wait, the man said, stepping forward. I know you. You're Finn from the royal stables. I used to deliver grain there before I left the fortress. Hello, Marcus, Finn said, remembering the friendly delivery man who had always stopped to chat about the animals. I didn't know you'd come west. I came seeking a better life. A free life. Marcus's expression was hard. And now you're here to drag me back in chains? I'm here to listen, Finn said simply. The king wants to understand why so many have chosen rebellion over peace. He's asked me to help because I'm human, and he thought you might speak more freely to me. The rebel leaders exchanged glances. Finally, their commander, a fierce reptilian woman named Saskia, spoke. Very well, we'll talk. But know this, we're not laying down our arms because you sent one sympathetic face. We're fighting for our freedom, and we won't stop until we have it or die trying. Over the next week, Finn and the diplomatic party met with rebels, refugees, and ordinary citizens of the Western Territories. What they heard was eye-opening. The grievances were specific and numerous, crushing taxes that left families struggling to feed themselves. Arbitrary laws enforced differently for imperial citizens versus conquered peoples. Local leaders appointed by the empire who were corrupt and abusive. Children being taken from military service with no regard for their families' needs. Resources extracted from the territories with nothing given back. We're not rebels because we love chaos. One elderly human woman told Finn, her eyes tired. We're rebels because we have no other choice. We tried working within the system. We sent petitions. We followed every rule. And we were ignored. Worse, we were punished for daring to speak up. Finn listened to story after story, taking careful notes. He saw children with hollow eyes, farmers whose land had been seized for imperial projects, craftspeople whose work was taken without fair payment. These weren't dangerous radicals bent on destruction. They were ordinary people pushed to desperation. On the seventh day, Saskia invited Finn to walk with her through a nearby village that had been the site of recent fighting. The buildings were damaged, several burned to their foundations. But people were already working to rebuild, showing a resilience that moved Finn deeply. You seem different from other imperial officials, Saskia observed. You actually care. I'm not an official, Finn said. I'm just a stable boy who got lucky. Or unlucky, depending on how you look at it. Saskia's laugh was bitter. A stable boy who has the Dragon King's ear. Do you know how strange that is? How impossible. I know. They walked in silence for a while. Then, Saskia said, will your king listen to what you tell him? Or will this all be for nothing? Finn thought about Thraxian, about the change he'd witnessed in the Dragon King over the past months. I think he will listen, he said slowly. He's learning that strength means more than just power. But I won't lie to you, Saskia. Change is hard. He spent decades ruling one way. Even if he wants to do things differently, the entire system is built on the old way. It's like trying to redirect a river. It takes time. We don't have time, Saskia replied. People are dying. Every day we spend fighting is another day families are torn apart, children go hungry, lives are destroyed. I know. I'll make him understand that. Saskia stopped, turning to face him directly. If he's truly willing to change, if he's truly willing to listen, then tell him this. We don't want to destroy the Empire. We want to be part of it on fair terms. We want representation. We want our voices heard in decisions that affect us. We want our cultures respected, our people treated with dignity. We want to contribute to something greater than ourselves, but not as slaves, as partners. Finn felt a chill run down his spine. This was the heart of it, the core truth that all the intelligence reports had missed. The Western Territories weren't fighting to be separate. They were fighting to be equal. I'll tell him, Finn promised. The journey back to Drakmor took 3 days. Finn spent most of it compiling his notes, organizing the testimonies and observations into a coherent report. Lady Seraph watched him work with approval. You have a gift for this, she said, for seeing the truth beneath the surface. I'll just pay attention to what people actually say instead of what I want to hear, Finn replied. That is rarer than you think. When they arrived at the fortress, Thraxian summoned them immediately. The king listened as Seraph gave her formal report, outlining the military situation, the rebel capabilities, the diplomatic opportunities. Then, he turned to Finn. And where'd you learn, stable boy? Finn took a breath and began to speak. He told the king everything. The stories of hardship and abuse, the reasonable grievances, the desire not for separation, but for equality. He described the determination he'd seen in the rebels, the resilience of the common people, the waste of life and potential that the current system created. They don't hate you, my lord, Finn concluded. They don't want to destroy the Empire. They want to be part of it, really part of it, not just subjects to be exploited. They're willing to fight and die for that chance. Thraxian was silent for a long time, his massive head lowered in thought. Finally, he spoke, his voice heavy with something that might have been regret. I built this empire to be strong, Thraxian said quietly, to be unassailable. I thought that meant crushing any dissent, demanding absolute obedience, showing no mercy to those who failed or opposed me. But I see now that I have built a palace of fear, and fear is not strength. It is the illusion of strength, hiding deep weakness. He rose and moved to the great window that overlooked his domain. The fortress, the city below, the territories stretching to every horizon. An empire vast and powerful, held together by force. Tell me honestly, Finn, if we continue as we have been, what is the future of this empire? Finn swallowed hard. Endless rebellions, my lord. You'll crush this one, and another will rise, and another. Each time, you'll have to be harsher, more brutal, until eventually, you're not ruling an empire. You're just containing one, spending all your energy keeping people down instead of building them up. And if we change, then maybe we create something better, something that lasts not because people are afraid, but because they actually want to be part of it. Thraxian turned back to face the room. His council had gathered during the report, and now they all waited for his decision. Some looked hopeful, others looked skeptical or even angry. General Croth's expression was particularly stormy. I'm going to do something that my father would have considered insane, Thraxian announced. I'm going to give the Western Territories what they ask for. The room erupted. Advisors shouted over each other, some in support, others in protest. Croth's voice rose above the rest. My lord, you cannot. This sets a precedent that will destroy us. Every territory will demand the same. Yes, Thraxian said calmly. They will, and we will give it to them. The room fell silent, shocked. I am establishing a Grand Council, the king continued. Representatives from every territory, every species, every level of our society. They will advise me on all matters of governance. They will have real power, not just symbolic positions. Their voices will shape policy. But your authority, Vexus began, will be strengthened, not weakened. A king who listens is more powerful than a king who only commands. I have learned this from. Thraxian's eyes found Finn, an unlikely teacher. If I can admit I was wrong about Pyroth, I can admit I was wrong about how to rule. The question is, will you follow me in this change, or will you cling to the old ways? It was a challenge, clearly stated. The advisors looked at each other, uncertain. This was unprecedented. Dragons didn't share power. Kings didn't dilute their authority. Everything about this went against centuries of tradition. But slowly, one by one, they nodded. Some enthusiastically, others reluctantly. But they nodded, because deep down, many of them had seen the same things Finn had seen. They knew the current system was unsustainable. Very well, Thraxian said. Lady Seraph, you will lead the effort to establish the Grand Council. General Croth, you will oversee the withdrawal of military forces from the Western Territories to be replaced with peacekeepers who are there to protect, not oppress. Vexus, you will begin reforming our tax and legal systems to address the inequities that have been brought to light. He assigned tasks to each advisor, laying out a comprehensive plan for reform. The scale of it was staggering. They weren't just addressing the Western Rebellion. They were fundamentally restructuring how the Empire operated. And Finn, Thraxian said, you will serve as my liaison to the common people. You will travel throughout the Empire, listening to their concerns, reporting back to me directly. You will be my eyes and ears among those who would never dare approach the throne themselves. Finn felt dizzy. A few months ago, he'd been a simple stable boy. Now, he was being given a position of real authority, one that could shape the future of millions. It was terrifying and humbling in equal measure. "My lord," he managed, "I'm honored, but I'm not qualified. You are qualified by your compassion, your honesty, and your ability to see people as they truly are, not as you wish them to be. That is worth more than any formal education." Thraxian's expression softened. "You saved Pyroth by understanding what he needed, not what I thought he needed. Now help me save this empire the same way." The reforms did not happen overnight. Nothing that substantial ever does. But they began slowly at first, then with gathering momentum. Word spread throughout the empire that the Dragon King was listening, was changing, was willing to admit fault, and seek better paths. The Western territories, skeptical at first, sent representatives to negotiate. Saskia herself came to Drakmor, walking into the fortress she had fought against, to sit at a table with Thraxian and hammer out the terms of peace. Finn sat in on those negotiations, watching two strong-willed leaders find common ground through honesty and mutual respect. "You understand," Saskia said during one session, "that trust will take time. Your words are encouraging, but we need to see action. We need proof that this isn't just a trick to get us to lay down our arms." "Understand," Thraxian replied, "which is why I propose this. The first session of the Grand Council will be held in your territory, not here in Drakmor. I will come to you. I will show my people, and yours, that the old hierarchy is truly changing." The gesture was unprecedented. A Dragon King, traveling to rebel territory, showing humility and willingness to meet others on their ground. Saskia studied Thraxian for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "If you do that, if you actually come, I think my people will believe. And if they believe, we can build something new together." 3 months later, Thraxian made that journey. He traveled with a small retinue, including Finn, deliberately avoiding any show of military might. When his skyship landed in the Western territories, thousands gathered to see him. There was fear in the crowd, yes, but also hope. A hope that had been absent for generations. The first session of the Grand Council was held in a converted barn, the only structure large enough to accommodate a dragon. Representatives from across the empire filed in, an unprecedented mix of species, cultures, and perspectives. Nobles sat beside former rebels. Conquered peoples sat alongside their conquerors. It was messy and chaotic and beautiful. Thraxian opened the session with words that would be remembered for generations. "I have been your king for 80 years. I have been a king of fear, of absolute authority, of punishment for any failure. Today, I ask you to help me become a different kind of king. A king who listens. A king who admits mistakes. A king who sees strength not in domination, but in partnership." The council session lasted 3 days. There were heated arguments, fundamental disagreements, moments when it seemed the whole thing would collapse into chaos. But it held together, driven by a shared desire to create something better. Policies were debated. Grievances were aired. Compromises were reached. And Finn, watching from his position near the king, saw something remarkable happening. People who had been enemies were starting to understand each other. Not agree necessarily, but understand. That understanding was the seed from which real change could grow. One evening, after a particularly grueling session, Finn found Thraxian alone, standing outside the barn and looking up at the stars. The Dragon King seemed smaller somehow, less imposing, more approachable. "Thank you," Thraxian said quietly. Finn blinked in surprise. "For what, my lord?" "For being brave enough to tell me the truth about Pyroth. For showing me that strength can include gentleness. For helping me see that the empire I built, while impressive, was also deeply flawed." The Dragon King's head lowered until his eye was level with Finn's face. "You changed my life, stable boy. And in doing so, you may have saved this empire." "I just spoke up for someone who needed help," Finn said. "Anyone would have done the same." "No. Most would have stayed silent, protected themselves, let Pyroth die rather than risk my anger. You chose differently." That took courage of a kind that is rare and precious. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Then Thraxian spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "I've been thinking about something you said months ago, about how relationships need to be two-sided. How listening is as important as commanding. I wonder if that's true not just for empires, but for all of life. For friendships, for families, for every connection we make with another being." "I think it probably is," Finn agreed. "Then, I have been a poor friend to many people. To Pyroth, certainly, but also to my advisors, my subjects, even my own family." A heavy sigh rolled from the dragon's throat. "It is difficult to change after so many years of being one way. There are moments when I want to fall back into old patterns, to demand rather than ask, to punish rather than understand. The old ways are comfortable, even when they're wrong." "But you don't fall back," Finn observed. "You keep trying. That's what matters." "Do I? Sometimes I'm not sure." I raised my voice at Vexus yesterday when he questioned a decision. Afterward, I saw the fear in his eyes, the same fear I had worked so hard to eliminate. I apologized, but the damage was done. He will remember that moment. Finn considered this. "My lord, I don't think change means never making mistakes. It means recognizing them and trying to do better next time. Vexus will remember you raising your voice, yes. But he'll also remember you apologizing. That second part is what's revolutionary. The old you would never have apologized." Thraxian's rumbling laugh was surprised and genuine. "When did you become so wise?" "I'm not wise. I just remember what it's like to be powerless, to be afraid, to need someone to hear you. I think if more people in power remembered that feeling, the world would be a better place. Perhaps that's what wisdom is, remembering what it means to be vulnerable." The Grand Council's first session concluded with a framework for ongoing governance. It wasn't perfect. There were compromises that left everyone somewhat dissatisfied, which, as Lady Seraph noted, probably meant they'd reached genuine middle ground. But it was a beginning, and that was enough. The real test came in the months that followed. The policies agreed upon had to be implemented. Centuries of tradition had to be overturned. People who had benefited from the old system resisted change. There were setbacks, moments of crisis, times when the whole thing threatened to come apart. But Thraxian held steady, and he had help. The Grand Council proved to be more than just a symbolic gesture. The representatives from across the Empire brought perspectives and solutions that never would have reached the throne room before. Problems that had seemed intractable found resolution when approached from new angles. Tensions that had simmered for generations began to ease as people felt genuinely heard. Finn traveled extensively during this period, visiting territories across the Empire. His role as liaison between the common people and the throne proved invaluable. He had a gift for making people feel comfortable, for getting them to share their true concerns rather than what they thought officials wanted to hear. And he reported everything to Thraxian with unflinching honesty, even when the news was difficult. In a mining colony on the Eastern Rim, he found workers suffering from a preventable illness caused by poor ventilation. He reported it. Thraxian ordered immediate reforms and sent healers. In a farming community to the south, he discovered that imperial quotas were so high that families were going hungry despite good harvests. He reported it. The quotas were adjusted. Again and again, Finn found problems and brought them to light, and Thraxian acted on them. Not everyone was happy with the changes. There were those who had profited from the old system, who had built their power on exploitation and corruption. Some resisted openly. Others worked to undermine the reforms from within. And a few turned to outright rebellion, though of a different kind than the Western uprising had been. Lord Draken was one such individual, a dragon noble of considerable power. He had grown wealthy from the territories under his control through methods that would not withstand scrutiny under the new system. When the Grand Council began investigating reports of abuse from his territories, he decided to act. He came to Drakmor with an army at his back, demanding an audience with Thraxian. The king granted it, though he had his own forces ready should things turn violent. The confrontation took place in the throne room, with the full court assembled to witness. You have grown weak, Draken declared, his voice booming through the chamber. You allow lesser species to question your authority. You apologize for exercising your power. You have forgotten what it means to be a dragon, what it means to rule. Thraxian regarded him calmly from his throne. I have forgotten nothing. I have simply learned new things. There is a difference. You've learned to bow to humans, Draken spat, his gaze finding Finn in the crowd. To let stable boys dictate policy. It's pathetic. Your father would be ashamed. A dangerous light entered Thraxian's eyes. Do not presume to speak for my father. And do not mistake compassion for weakness. I am still your king, Draken. The question is, are you still my subject? I'm loyal to the Empire, Draken said. The real Empire. The one built on strength and conquest. Not this weak shadow you're creating. Then, you are not loyal to me. Because I am the Empire, and the Empire changes as I change. The room was utterly silent. This was the moment of truth. Would Thraxian fall back into old patterns? Would he crush Draken for this challenge, proving that the reforms were only surface deep? Or would he find a new way? I could destroy you, Thraxian said quietly. I'm older, larger, more powerful. In single combat, you would not last 10 minutes. The old me would have already turned you to ash for your insolence. Draken's posture shifted slightly, betraying uncertainty. But I will not, Thraxian continued, because that would prove your point. That might makes right. That power is only about domination. Instead, I offer you a choice. Submit to investigation by the Grand Council. If you're found to have ruled your territories justly, you will be vindicated. If you're found to have abused your power, you will face consequences, but also the opportunity to make amends. You expect me to submit to judgment by lesser beings? Draken's voice dripped with contempt. I expect you to submit to justice. The composition of the council is irrelevant. What matters is whether your actions have served the Empire and its people, or only yourself. And if I refuse, then you will be stripped of your territories and exiled. You may keep your life and your dignity, but you will no longer be part of what we are building here. It was a masterful response, Finn thought. Thraxian was offering Draken a path that preserved his honor while still holding him accountable. It acknowledged the reality of the situation without resorting to violence. It was the response of a king who had learned that true strength meant having the power to destroy, but choosing a better path. Draken stood there, clearly struggling with the decision. His pride warred with his sense of self-preservation. Finally, stiffly, he nodded. I will submit to your council's investigation. Good. You are dismissed. As Draken left, his army dispersing outside without violence, the court released a collective breath. Thraxian had passed the test. He had stood firm in his principles without reverting to tyranny. The reforms would hold. After the court emptied, Thraxian summoned Finn to his private chambers. The Dragon King looked tired, the weight of decades seeming to press upon him. That was difficult, he admitted. Everything in me wanted to burn him for that challenge. To show everyone what happens when you question my authority. But you didn't, Finn said. No, because you were right. Because the human stable boy who dared to tell me I was hurting my oldest friend taught me that there are better ways to be strong. Finn felt emotion tighten his throat. I didn't teach you anything, my lord. I just reminded you of what you already knew, but had forgotten. Perhaps. But sometimes we need others to reflect our better selves back to us. You have done that, not just for me, but for this entire empire. Thraxian shifted, getting comfortable. I wanted to ask you something. The Grand Council functions well, but I think it needs a voice that specifically represents those without power. The servants, the workers, the people who keep this empire running but have no official standing. I would like you to take that seat. Finn's eyes widened. My lord, I'm already your liaison. I don't need. It's not about what you need. It's about what the empire needs. You've proven you can speak truth to power. You've shown you care about those who are overlooked. And you have the trust of both the throne and the common people. That combination is rare and precious. Will you accept? It was a massive responsibility. A seat on the Grand Council came with real authority, the ability to shape policy and affect millions of lives. It was also dangerous. Counselors became targets for those who opposed change, who wanted to return to the old ways. But how could he refuse? This was exactly what the Empire needed. Voices for those who had none. Representation for the powerless. Someone who remembered what it was like to be invisible and afraid. I accept, Finn said. Good. I am glad. Though I must warn you, your life is about to become considerably more complicated. That proved to be an understatement. As a counselor, Finn found himself at the center of nearly every major debate and decision. He spoke for the workers when labor reforms were discussed. He advocated for better education when school policies came up. He pushed for fair treatment of all species when discrimination cases arose. And he did it all with the same honest, straightforward approach that had saved Pyrotha's life. Not everyone appreciated his efforts. There were attempts to discredit him, to paint him as too idealistic, too naive, too sympathetic to troublemakers. But Thraxian stood behind him, and gradually others began to see the value of having someone who truly understood the lives of ordinary people helping to shape policy. 2 years after the first Grand Council session, Finn returned to the Western Territories for a reunion with Saskia. The former rebel commander had become one of the most effective counselors, her fierce intelligence and moral clarity earning respect even from those who had once been her enemies. They met in the same forest clearing where the first diplomatic talks had taken place, though it looked very different now. Instead of a hastily prepared meeting ground, it had been transformed into a permanent pavilion, a symbol of the peace that had been achieved. I never thought I'd see this day, Saskia admitted. They sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. An empire where we actually have a voice, where our concerns matter, where a human stable boy sits on the highest council, and the Dragon King listens to him. It's strange, isn't it? Finn said. Sometimes I still expect to wake up and find it was all a dream, that I'm back in the stables, and none of this ever happened. But it did happen, because you were brave, because Thraxian was willing to learn, because enough people believe that things could be different. Do you think it will last? Finn asked. After Thraxian is gone? Will the next king maintain these reforms, or will everything slide back to the old ways? Saskia considered this. That's the test, isn't it? Whether we've built something sustainable or just created a moment in time. I think it depends on us, on whether we can make these new ways so fundamental to how the Empire operates that no single ruler can undo them. That's what I'm trying to do, Finn said. Every decision, every policy, I try to think, will this stand if Thraxian isn't here to defend it? Will this survive without him? Then you're doing the right thing. Saskia stood, stretching. Come on, there's something I want to show you. She led him through the forest to a small village, one of many that had been caught in the fighting during the rebellion. Finn had visited it during his first journey west and remembered the destruction, the fear in people's eyes, the sense of hopelessness. Now it was transformed. New buildings stood where old ones had burned. Gardens flourished. Children played in the streets, their laughter ringing out without fear. And in the village square stood a statue. It took Finn a moment to realize what he was looking at, and when he did, he felt his face flush. It was him, or rather, a stylized version of him, carved in stone. He was depicted holding an injured bird, his expression gentle and caring. At the base of the statue, words were carved. He reminded us that strength can be kind. I didn't commission this, Saskia said, seeing Finn's stunned expression. The villagers did it themselves. They wanted to honor you, to remind themselves and their children of what you represent. That ordinary people can change the world. That compassion is power. Finn couldn't speak. He stood there, staring at this impossible thing, feeling overwhelmed by the responsibility it represented. People were looking to him as a symbol. Not just him, really, but what he represented, the possibility of change, the power of speaking truth, the importance of caring about others. I'm just one person, he finally managed. I'm nobody special. That's exactly why you're special, Saskia said. Because if you can make a difference, then maybe anyone can. That's hope, Finn. Real hope. The kind that changes history. Back in Drakmore, Thraxian continued to evolve as a ruler. The changes in him went deeper than policy reforms. He laughed more. He showed affection to his advisors. He spent time with Pyroth not just as transportation, but as a friend, flying together over the Empire simply for the joy of flight. And people noticed. The fortress, once a place of fear and rigid hierarchy, became something different. Still formal, still ordered, but with an undercurrent of genuine respect rather than terror. Servants smiled. Guards relaxed. Even the nobility seemed less brittle, less desperate to prove themselves. 5 years after Finn had first been summoned to save Pyroth, the Empire had been fundamentally transformed. It wasn't perfect. No system created by imperfect beings ever is. There were still inequities, still problems, still challenges to overcome. But the trajectory had changed. The Empire was becoming something it had never been before, a true partnership between ruler and ruled. Finn stood in his chambers one evening, looking out over the fortress. His rooms were fine now, befitting his status as a counselor. But he kept them simple, decorated with mementos from his travels rather than expensive luxury. On his desk sat his most prized possession, a sketch of Pyroth that the dragon had allowed him to make, capturing the moment when he'd first earned the creature's trust. A knock came at the door. "Enter," Finn called. Thraxian's head poked through the doorway, or as much of it as would fit. It still amused Finn that the mighty Dragon King had to navigate doorways designed for smaller beings. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," Thraxian said. "Never, my lord. Please come in. Or, well, as much as you can." Thraxian settled himself in the doorway, a position they found worked reasonably well for private conversations. "I wanted to thank you," the king said. "Again, I know I've said it before, but I don't think I can say enough. You saved more than Pyroth's life that day. You saved mine as well. Saved me from becoming a monster, from losing everything that mattered in pursuit of an illusion of strength." "You save yourself," Finn replied. "I just pointed in a direction. You chose to walk that path. Ever humble. That's part of why this works, you know? You could have used your influence for personal gain. Many would have. But you've remained focused on helping others, on making the Empire better for everyone." "What else would I do?" Finn asked, genuinely puzzled. "I remember what it was like to be powerless. Why would I want anyone else to feel that way?" Thraxian's expression was difficult to read, but something like pride shone in his ancient eyes. "That's what makes you extraordinary, Finn. Not that you're clever or skilled, though you are both, but that you've never forgotten where you came from. Never forgotten what it means to struggle, to fear, to need help. That empathy is your greatest gift." They sat together in comfortable silence. Outside, the stars were beginning to appear, pinpricks of light in the darkening sky. Finn thought about how far they'd both come from that desperate night in Pyroth's chamber. How much had changed because one person had been willing to speak an uncomfortable truth. "Do you ever regret it?" Thraxian asked suddenly. "Your old life was simpler, quieter. Now you carry the weight of the Empire on your shoulders alongside the rest of us." Finn considered this carefully. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity," he admitted. "The stables were peaceful. I knew my purpose, my place. This is harder, more complicated. But no, I don't regret it. How could I? I've seen what we've accomplished together. The lives we've changed, the suffering we've prevented. If I'd stayed in the stables, none of that would have happened. Or perhaps it would have happened differently, with someone else as the catalyst. Maybe, but I'm glad it was me. I'm glad I got to be part of this." Thraxian nodded slowly. "As am I. Sleep well, my friend." "You too, my lord." After the king left, Finn returned to the window. The Empire stretched out before him, vast and varied, full of millions of individuals with their own hopes and dreams and struggles. It was overwhelming to think about the sheer scale of it. But it was also beautiful, because now, more than ever before, those individuals had a voice. They had representation. They had hope. And it had all started with a sick dragon and a stable boy who dared to speak truth to power. The years continued to pass. The reforms deepened, becoming ingrained in the fabric of the Empire. New generations grew up knowing nothing else, accepting as normal what their parents had considered revolutionary. The Grand Council expanded, including more voices, more perspectives. The empire grew not through conquest, but through willing alliance, as neighboring powers saw what had been built and chose to join rather than resist. Finn served on the council for 2 decades, his hair graying early from the stress of his responsibilities. He trained others to continue his work, finding people across the empire who had his gift for empathy, for understanding what others needed. They became a network of voices for the voiceless, ensuring that even as the empire grew, it didn't lose sight of individual people. Thraxian lived for many years more, as dragons do. But eventually, age caught up with even the mighty Dragon King. On his deathbed, surrounded by those he loved, he called for Finn one last time. "Old friend," Thraxian said, his voice weak, but still warm. "We did something remarkable, didn't we?" "We did, my lord. I want you to promise me something. Don't let them forget. Don't let the Empire forget that strength can be kind, that power is a tool for service, not domination. Don't let it all slide back to the old ways." "I promise," Finn said, tears streaming down his face. "I promise." Thraxian's eyes closed. Pyroth, ancient himself now, lay beside his lifelong companion. The 2 dragons pressed together one final time, and then, peacefully, Thraxian slipped away. The Empire mourned. But it did not fall apart. The systems that had been put in place held. Thraxian's daughter, who had learned her father's hard-won lessons about leadership, took the throne and continued his work. And Finn, though he eventually retired from the council, remained a symbol and an inspiration for generations to come. The statue in the Western Village was joined by others across the empire. Not grand monuments, but simple reminders of a truth that had been forgotten and rediscovered, that every individual matters, that the humblest person can change the world, that strength without compassion is just cruelty, and power without love is just tyranny. And in stables across the empire, a new tradition emerged. Young handlers learning their craft will be told the story of Finn, the stable boy who saved a dragon, changed a king, and transformed an empire. They would be reminded that their work was important, that caring for animals taught lessons applicable to all of life, that paying attention to what others needed was the foundation of everything good in the world. The empire Thraxian had built through fear lasted a few generations. The empire he and Finn built together, founded on mutual respect and genuine partnership, endured for centuries. And at its heart, always was a simple truth that a human stable boy had taught a dragon king, that strength means having the power to hurt but choosing instead to heal,